One of the most slept-on characters from Berserk has to be the Paramarishi Senani, the general of the ancient Kushan Empire, Daiba. We understand why those who only know of Berserk through the anime might not have heard of him, but manga fans have known Daiba for over 2 decades now, and we still can't seem to figure out exactly where this guy sits. Is he an evil demonic sorcerer who brings darkness into the world, or is he a good guy who will actually help our heroes win the war against the Falcon of Light? Daiba is an enduring mystery, but in this video, we'll be attempting to unravel him. We'll talk more about how this recent entry into the Berserk pantheon of characters has actually influenced the course of the series from the shadows for decades, and why he might just be the key to this whole Griffith problem. So, without further ado, this is the Master Manipulator of Berserk, Daiba, Explained. He's the last of a dying breed. Why Daiba's magical knowledge surpasses all others. To understand why Daiba is so important to the story, we must first understand how sorcery works in Berserk. Because right now, knowledge of sorcery is the greatest weapon in anyone's arsenal, considering that information has been lost to time and they now exist in a quote-unquote magical world. There was a time 1,000 years ago when the astral and physical worlds overlapped with one another and magic and spiritual communion was a more accepted practice, but ever since the decline of Supreme King Geiseric's empire, magic has become outlawed and its practitioners have been hunted and executed for heresy. In the Western Hemisphere, witches and wizards are mostly extinct. The Holy See, which is the religion that rose up in place of the formerly polytheistic world, conducted inquisitions en masse and eradicated all magic from the West. They raised up their churches on grounds where spirits existed to suppress their influence, and the arcane arts were all but lost to the world. That's why when Shirke first leaves Flora's spirit tree abode, she has a tough time adjusting to the normal world. She's used to living among the trees and spirits because Shirke was raised in a rare pocket where magical influence continued to survive. She was trained by one of the only mages that was left on Berserk's main continent, Flora, and she only knew of one other place where magi like her existed, the fabled island village of Elfhelm. The implication here is quite simple. The once powerful arcana has been rooted out of the physical world through intense persecution, and being a witch or a wizard is about the most dangerous occupation given the current state of affairs. But when it comes to the eastern hemisphere of Berserk, the story is a little different. Magic persisted in the east and took the form of a proper religion, as opposed to being outright suppressed by churches. You might have noticed we kept emphasizing the Western world earlier, and that's intentional. Berserk's world and politics are loosely inspired by what's happening in our world, and the Holy See's influence trajectory is meant to mirror the rise of Christianity. And while Christianity managed to spread its roots throughout Europe, the Americas, and some parts of Africa, it never quite managed to take control of Asia. Eastern countries continue to practice ancient religious practices. Hinduism in India has existed for thousands of years, and a majority of Indians continue to practice it to this day. That's not to say that there are no Christians in India, but the population is minuscule when compared with the number of Hindus in the country. The Kushan Empire, to which Daiba belongs, is heavily inspired by India, so we didn't pick that example randomly. Their culture, society, and traditions are a mix of several Eastern civilizations. The Kushan are horse riders who hold Kural ties, which was a Mongol council often convened by the Great Khan. They wear helms and have structures that are deeply influenced by Mughal India, whose rulers trace their descent from Genghis Khan but have a predominantly Islamic society. But perhaps the most important part of Kushan culture is their religion, which is an eclectic mix of Buddhism and Hinduism. Many of the Kushan Empire's religious structures are named after real-life Buddhist architecture. The most recent chapters of Berserk see Guts enter a stupa, which is a distinctly Buddhist structure because of its function as a ritual internment ground. But the gods of the Kushan are predominantly Hindu, which we learn through none other than the focus of this video, Daiba. When he faces off against our heroes, he recognizes the Berserker armor's ode energy as the prana of Durga, the Hindu goddess of war, and he deems Serpico to be a warrior of Vayu, who's the Hindu god of the wind. Serpico wields the Sylph Sword and Sylph Cloak, which allows him to fly, so it's intriguing, to say the least, that Daiba's assessment of Guts and Serpi's powers are so accurate, despite being perceived through a completely different lens. The Western world doesn't know anything about Durga or Vayu. Shirke explains that most magic is made possible through the existence of elementals, tiny spirits that embody the properties of nature's elements and are smaller versions of the four kings of the world, godlike spirits who are manifestations of the cardinal direction directions and the power of nature itself. Shirkei's knowledge is extremely rare given the eradication of magic from the Western world, but the fact that Daiba identifies Guts and Serpico's powers through the lens of his religion can mean only one thing. The Kushan Empire adapted magic into a religious belief and have been practicing it ever since the fall of Geiseric's empire through a special class of mages called Brahmins. In India, the Brahmins sit at the top of the caste system because they're the ones allowed to conduct religious rituals. In Berserk, the Brahmins are priests who can wield magic and have thus earned the distinction of being touched by the divine, making them different from regular men. We don't want to get too deep into this stuff because casteism continues to be a sensitive topic to this day in India, but basically what we're trying to say here is that the practice of magic continued to be quite open in the Kushan Empire thanks to it being turned into a religion. But the real question you might be asking yourself right about now is, why are we even telling you all this? The answer is actually quite simple. It's because Daiba is part of this exclusive class of sorcerers and priests. Daiba is a sadhu and a Brahmin, a man who has devoted his life to studying the arcane arts and who confidently approached Guts and Serpico despite being outnumbered because he prays to Durga and Vayu every morning and evening. His power comes from his belief, which is, ironically enough, how magic works in the West as well. The clearer your connection with spirits becomes, the stronger their power is, and the fact that Daiba thinks of magical spirits as literal gods makes his power quite superior to most other mages from this series. In fact, when Shirkei first meets him, she's shocked that a wizard as powerful as him exists in the first place because what Daiba accomplished with the Kushan Empire's global conquest was nothing short of a Herculean feat. We'll get into the specifics of that in just a little while because right now, we need to talk about how Daiba's devotion changed the course of Berserk. The fact that magic persisted through religion in the Kushan Empire is a complete game changer because it means that magic was quite prevalent in that region when it was believed to be dead everywhere else. This means that the Kushan Brahmins had a lot more time to study and analyze the astral world, and it's that extra wealth of knowledge that makes them important to the story. Daiba is introduced as the Wizard General, the Paramarishi Senani of the Kushan Emperor Ganishka. He is created familiars of such a sophisticated level that even a prodigy like Shirkei is shocked by his skills. Shirkei was the student of one of the strongest mages in Berserk, mind you, so her being impressed means a lot, and that's because Daiba has spent his entire life in the pursuit of divine knowledge, aka the power of the arcane. He's the top Brahmin of the Kushan Empire, as we learned in the recent chapters of Berserk, but he plays an even more important role from a narrative perspective because Daiba was basically responsible for the Millennium Falcon arc. It's revealed in a flashback that Daiba is the one who gave Emperor Ganishka his behelit. This flashback is from Ganishka's perspective, so we can rely on it to be truthful, but it reveals something interesting about his transformation into an apostle. Ganishka was most likely the first apostle whose creation was predicted by a human because it's implied that Daiba knew what he was doing when he gave him the behelit. Daiba is a man who has spent his entire life in the pursuit of the arcane. His deepest desire is to create a kingdom of magic so that he can spend all his days diving into the depths of the astral world without pesky regulations. He was the reason the Kushan army became a lot more monstrous under Ganishka, and we'll talk about that in a few moments, but the key thing to understand here is that Daiba facilitated Ganishka's ascension. That's only possible if he can interpret the flow of causality, and the manga has hinted several times that he can. The most recent example came from the moment where the Kushan Empire made contact with Roderick's vessel, the Seahorse, and that was an expedition arranged in response to Daiba being granted a prophetic vision. Prophecy is a tricky concept in Berserk because it can take a few different forms. There's a character named Sonia, who's a human oracle, much like the Oracle of Delphi, who spits out prophetic warnings to those around her whenever her eyes are glazed over. But Sonia doesn't often remember what she says, so relying on her to interpret the meaning of a prophecy she gives out is sort of useless. The other way to glance into the future is through scrying, which is a process the mages of Elfhelm engage with. They use crystal balls and arcane invocations to glimpse into the future, and in fact, we've seen a regular woods witch engage in scrying as well, thanks to that fortune teller woman who predicts Rickart's fate shortly before the eclipse. Daiba most likely engages in scrying too, and his understanding of astral happenings is much deeper than that of the great gurus of Elfhelm because the Kushan Empire preserved magical knowledge through their religion. And Daiba in particular seems to be intimately aware of the evil side of magic, as evidenced by his description of apostles. In chapter 301, he calls them heresy to the world of man, and he seems to know that they're infernal reincarnations, resurrected through dark arts, of those who possessed extreme ego and desire as human beings. Daiba knows that apostles meet quote-unquote karma at the brink of death and are reborn to despise and be despised, ridicule and be ridiculed, hate and be hated. This is quite an accurate description of apostles from an astral perspective, and it's a lot more than the information that's provided to us by Flora and the great gurus who are supposed to be the actual magic experts. So, Daiba's knowledge of the astral world, causality, and arcana itself is too detailed to make the fact that he gave Ganishka his Behelit a mere coincidence. Daiba is a fortune-telling, future-seeing wizard with so much information about both the good and evil parts of arcana that he's confident he can manipulate the strongest apostle in Berserk history. What do we mean by that? Well, it's time to talk about the demon army. He was the architect of Ganishka and his demon army. One of the things that allowed the Kushan Empire to steamroll their opposition in the current timeline of Berserk is the fact that they have a hidden army of demonic creatures that's specifically designed to clear up battlefield after battlefield. We're introduced to this army in chapter 239, which is simply titled Familiars. In that chapter, a horde of possessed bipedal crocodiles attacks the Black Swordsman party with harpoons, and Guts and friends have to make a desperate stand to repel that attack. What makes these crocodiles interesting is the fact that they're familiars, creatures created from sorcery through the bonding of human and animal souls. Eventually, it's discovered that the controllers of these familiars are a bunch of bald Kushan monks who are beached just a few meters away from them, and after Serpico decapitates them, the crocodiles revert to normal and scurry back into the sea for the most part. At first, we're confused as to why Kushan monks are suddenly attacking the westernmost port city in the world with demonic familiars, but a couple chapters later, in 243, it's all revealed to be part of a greater plan. Turns out, Guts' little pocket was the only part of the entire coastline of Ratanus that was successfully defended. Every other inch of it fell to the Kushan Empire's demon army, whose general was revealed to be none other than Daiba. We saw from the flashback scene where Emperor Ganishka looks back at everything that led to him becoming an apostle that he didn't bring Daiba on as a counselor immediately after he received the Behelit. In fact, Ganishka was quite a bit older than Griffith when he received his Behelit, where he was already an emperor with a black repute. He encountered Daiba on the roadside one day as he was passing through on his royal elephant, and Daiba handed him a mysterious stone. This random sadhu explained to Ganishka that when the time was right, this stone would save him from death and turn him into the most powerful being on Earth. We're not sure if Ganishka believed him, but he certainly kept the Behelit by his side and presumably forgot all about what the sadhu who gave him the Behelit looked like. But from the artwork, we can tell that this sadhu was none other than Daiba, and that Ganishka sent for him specifically after what he said about gaining power through sacrifice came true. After a particularly long campaign that lasted for several years, Ganishka once returned home for a banquet and was nearly assassinated by his own son. He'd feared this day would come since the day his son was born, because he did the same thing to his own father, and for all his faults, Ganishka didn't seem to want to perpetuate the cycle. But, as we see from his thoughts, the first move he makes after being stabbed with spears multiple times is to reach out for his Behelit, as if he knows what its true purpose is supposed to be. It's only after he becomes an apostle that Ganishka establishes his secret wing of demonic soldiers, because he finally realizes that everything that roadside sadhu was blabbering about was actually true. After tasting the power of an apostle, which in his case manifests as the ability to subdue elements and turn himself into a murderous thundercloud, Ganishka becomes fixated on using dark magic to fulfill his ambition, which is to become the second emperor of all mankind. His ego and extreme desire to emulate the legacy of Supreme King Gaisric was quite well known, and perhaps that played a part in Daiba handing the Behelit to him. Typically, those who interpret the flow of causality can also discern the kind of people who would become players in its schemes by creating psychological profiles of certain archetypes. Daiba must have known that Ganishka is the type of man who will do anything to fulfill his ambition, including sacrificing his own humanity. Once the Dread Emperor realized Daiba was correct, he sent for him and got to work on creating that demon army wing we've been talking about. Daiba was declared Ganishka's Paramarishi Senani, which roughly translates to High Priest General in Hindi. This gave him the authority to commandeer several other mage monks from the Empire and make them work directly under him as he harnessed the power of the Abyss even further. Daiba created two divisions of the demon army, the aforementioned familiars, who are called Pishacha because they're created through spiritual possession, and the Daka, a division filled with demon babies, whom we'll get to in a few moments because they're important. Daiba's familiars are different from what familiars look like in Western magic because we've actually seen them elsewhere. After encountering the possessed crocodiles, Shirke decided to create a few familiars of her own, using thorns to create these cute little snakes that could be controlled with a ring. Shirkei's familiars obey the will of the mage who wields the ring, and though they're crude, they're powerful enough to bind the Pishacha and hold them down. But Shirkei's familiars don't look nearly as monstrous as the familiars made by Daiba and his Harashara, who all sport demonic fangs and appendages across the board. This suggests that the source of the magic being used to create them is different. Where Shirkei draws upon the power of goodness and nature to create her familiars, Daiba draws upon abyssal magic, and this idea becomes even stronger when we realize how he creates the Daka. The Behelit is an object that is highly spiritual in nature and whose origins and schematics are shrouded in mystery. Guts has been carrying a Behelit for years, and yet he doesn't really know how it works, only that it doesn't work for him, most likely. That's because the person he contacts for an explanation on how to use it doesn't know much about it herself, and that contact is the most knowledgeable witch we've seen in this franchise, Flora herself. Flora tells Guts the base nature of a Behelit and how it works and what happens when it's used, but she can't explain exactly what creates apostles and god hands because she doesn't know what part of the astral world Behelits are linked to and what truly powers them. But Daiba clearly knows and understands those things on an intimate level, because not only does he know what a Behelit is, he friggin' replicates it as part of an experiment he's carrying out on a global scale. See, the real reason Daiba joined Ganishka wasn't to help him become Emperor of the World, it was so that he could be given a corner of it to conduct all kinds of magical experiments. Like we mentioned earlier, Daiba's greatest desire was to create a kingdom of magic, and he's more like a mad scientist than an evil wizard. He wants to push Arcana to its boundaries and then beyond those boundaries, because ultimately, Daiba is searching for the cosmic truth, which can become an endless, all-consuming pursuit. To achieve such an abstract goal, he needs to dive deep into the realm of experimentation, because without it, he won't be able to understand the true nature of things. He helped Ganishka become an apostle because he understood the true nature and meaning of a Behelit, and then he helps him on his global conquest by creating a Behelit of his own. Daiba figures out that the Behelit essentially creates a link between the vortex of souls and the heart of an apostle, which is how they're resurrected stronger than ever. While Behelits can only be used by those fated to use them, a global conquest cannot be left to chance, so Daiba endeavors to reverse engineer a Behelit of his own. He figures out that the link between an apostle and the abyss must be the thing that's actually reanimating their dead flesh, and that if he can somehow harness this link, then he should be able to use it to infect others with evil. Daiba must have known that trolls can reproduce with humans by impregnating human women and making their own progeny burst out of them, alien style. So he uses that same logic to create his man-made Behelit. Daiba gathers dozens of living apostles from the east and cuts them open in such a way that their link to the astral world is exposed, but their bodies are kept alive. He hooks these apostles up to a massive chained contraption and then floods that contraption with amniotic fluid, which he likely harvested from thousands of pregnant women. What he then does is drop pregnant women into the contraption, and the amniotic fluid within their wombs resonates with the amniotic fluid in the man-made Behelit to infect the child growing within them. The Behelit's fluid has been infused with the raw essence of evil that runs through an apostle's veins, which, when it comes into contact with the fluid of the pregnant mother's womb, causes the child within to mutate. Said child grows at an abnormally fast rate and bursts through its mother's belly, again, alien style, sporting horns and fangs that are characteristic of demons. These demon babies are then penned into cages where they feed on their mother's corpses until they mature, and then they're used as soldiers for the Kushan Empire's clandestine nightly assaults. The Daka form the backbone of Daiba's demon army because they're the stand-ins for humans in it. The Pishacha are all equivalents of war animals that have been possessed to make them stronger. The crocodile, tiger, and elephant Pishacha are used as enforcers on land, combining the dexterity of humans with the feral strength of beasts. The Makara are possessed whales, each of whom can drown at least 10 warships before taking lethal damage. Daiba and Ganishka really thought of everything when they were coming up with their troop composition, because the Pishacha themselves can pretty much take care of enemies on both land and sea, but they can't make the more subtle movements that humans can, which is why the Daka are required, as they're also seen riding the tiger Pishacha into battle like horses on occasion. Most of the screen time both divisions of the demon army gets is spent battling heavyweights like Guts' party or Griffith's apostle army, which is why they often feel like fodder. But that doesn't change the fact that they were integral to speeding up Ganishka's world conquest. Before becoming an apostle, the Dread Emperor had to spend several years on a single war campaign because he was using conventional military tactics. Such tactics require a lot of time, and time is something Ganishka didn't have a lot of as a human. When he became an apostle, he essentially became invincible, but he couldn't let that information slip out because it would be disastrous for him. Most of his Kushan generals, soldiers, and allies are unaware of the fact that Ganishka is a demon and that he's using demonic troops to win battles at night. Many of the Kushan were shocked by the revelation of Ganishka's apostle form in the aftermath of the battle for Vratanis, and the fact that Daiba was called upon to explain what happened in the West by the current Kurul Tai tells us that the Empire was kept entirely in the dark about Ganishka's abominable acts. Of course, Daiba skips mentioning his involvement in Ganishka's atrocities to protect himself, but that's just how politics works, and Daiba is a skilled politician. He's integral to the development of Ganishka's hit-and-run strategy, and it's implied that Daiba's involvement in his campaigns moved the timeline on Ganishka's global conquest up by a considerable degree. In fact, if he was able to subdue the entire coastline of Vratanis in a single night, then it's not unreasonable to think that Ganishka probably toppled entire kingdoms using his demon army. Breaking through the coastline defenses of a seafaring kingdom isn't as easy as the Daka and Pishacha made it look, so the demon army was certainly quite useful for Ganishka and Daiba for most of their military campaigns, especially when they set out for the west. It's just that when they arrived at the final frontier, they encountered enemies that just weren't the right match for them. Ganishka was eager to conquer the Western Hemisphere, not just to become the second Geiseric, but also to wage war against Griffith specifically. He brought the Bakiraka, a clan that was exiled by his family centuries ago, to track and kill the Falcon of Light in exchange for being restored to their ancestral lands in the Empire. Ganishka clearly thought that he could not only fight Griffith, who he knew would be a God Hand member, but also that he had a chance to win, probably because he had Daiba's magical knowledge on his side. In fact, he even admits that he kind of created the demon army in response to the prophecy of the Falcon, which told him that Griffith would lead a demonic army of his own. Ganishka told the Bakiraka Prince Salat that his task to capture Griffith was handed down to him by the Oracle, which in this case could refer to Daiba himself, considering he acts as Salat's Oracle later in the series. And we say all this because ultimately, it makes Daiba the architect of Ganishka's life and his greatest glory. He gave him his Behelit, knowing he'll become the strongest apostle of all time. He then created a demon army under him because it was the best way to conduct practical magical experiments and dive into the depths of the astral world. Everything Daiba did was to further his own obsession with the arcane, and obtaining results for Ganishka was just a byproduct. But he eventually became too full of his own brilliance to take into account that losses would have consequences, and that ultimately he was in service to the Emperor, but he wasn't Emperor himself. Daiba pushes the demon army's attack on Vratanis a lot harder than he had anticipated because of the presence of Guts. When the Black Swordsman cuts down all of his Makara, who are supposed to be a nightmare for even apostles to deal with, Daiba decides to personally engage the enemy with his ultimate weapon. Through his magical knowledge and prowess, Daiba had managed to tame the ancient water spirit called the Kundalini, which, at its most potent, possessed the power of a raging river. He was confident that as long as he had Kundalini, he could bring down Guts and his allies because he outranked them in magical knowledge. He was a bit shocked to see Western representatives of his Eastern deities, but that's because Daiba is a bit of a fanatic. He perceives magic through the lens of his religion, and that's why he uses words like prana and kshatriya to talk about ode energy and Guts and Serpico. When his seemingly unbeatable Kundalini is defeated by the teamwork of Guts, Serpico, and Shirke, Daiba is shocked because he didn't think there were mages powerful enough to stand up to him out there, and then he's dismayed when Ganishka zaps him out of the sky for failing so spectacularly. The Emperor sidelines his most important magical advisor because he fails at producing the results he wanted the most, and so he decides to do something that no one has ever done before. After coming face to face with Griffith and seeing his immense power, as well as the fact that he was helpless against someone who's effectively his god, Ganishka made the call to dunk himself into Daiba's man-made Behelit. Ganishka's reasons for this were based on his observation of the Behelit and the explanations Daiba had given him. Daiba had described it as a portal to the depths of the abyss, from where fragments are broken off and infused with children still in their mother's wombs to reincarnate them as Daka soldiers. The Daka can be controlled by Daiba's Harashata because they're essentially imbued with astral energy and the spirits of the damned, and the man-made Behelit was created to duplicate the reincarnation effect of actual Behelits. Behelits are highly spiritual objects that are clearly linked to people's souls and destinies and are only good enough for a one-off trip to the abyss. There are no records of people reusing Behelits, which implies to Daiba that a single reincarnation is all the human body is meant to be capable of. When Ganishka declares his intent to lower himself into the man-made Behelit to boost his power by drawing more from the astral well, Daiba is visibly concerned because he knows that this is too dangerous. Daiba had been flirting with astral magic in a mostly safe and controlled environment thanks to his superior skill as a mage sage. He knew exactly which factors to manipulate to make things work, and he was confident in his power and somewhat reckless in his approach, but never suicidal. He knew that what Ganishka was attempting was basically suicide because there was no telling what would happen if a genuine reincarnate like him forced another reincarnation. The results were disastrous, of course. Ganishka turned into a massive, abominable eldritch monster, and he nearly broke the world trying to maintain his slipping sanity. Daiba tried flying over to one of Ganishka's heads to talk him out of his power-addled daze, but he spit hot flames at him, thinking that he was just a fly on the horizon. Daiba watched in horror as Griffith's war demons locked horns and fangs with Daiba's pseudo-mini-me's, and that horror turned to shock when he saw something he didn't think was possible. Daiba saw apostles working alongside humans willingly, and that made him feel even more out of sorts about what Ganishka had just done to himself. Like we mentioned earlier, Daiba knows that apostles are heresy to the world of man and specifically made to hunt down humans. Seeing predator and prey working alongside one another baffled him. He realized that what Griffith is doing is on a whole other level compared to his plans with Ganishka because he's using the power of evil through acceptance and not in secrecy. Up until this point, everything Daiba had done was in the service of his dream, which was to exist in a world overflowing with magic. But seeing Griffith usher in Fantasia by cutting open Ganishka's corpse must have given him second thoughts because he ends up switching sides in a big way. In his pursuit of magical dominance, Daiba flirted one too many times with the flames of evil, and he was finally burned. This is why when we see him again hiding in a barn in Falconia, it feels like he's been completely defeated. Daiba might have harnessed the power of evil in his pursuit of magical power, but he never meant to turn the world itself evil. He spends his days keeping the horses in line at a barn as he plots his escape. The opportunity presents itself to him in the most unexpected form because it comes from someone he never imagined would help him in the first place. One of the people integral to getting Daiba out of Griffith's infernal capital was the Bakiraka prince Salat, who had previously renounced his oath to Emperor Ganishka after discovering his true nature. This is also when Daiba encounters Rickert, the only man to have physically harmed a God Hand member, in addition to the only person who was ever nice to him, Erica, and he starts seeing a path towards redemption. Daiba knows he can't exactly reverse the current condition of the world by himself, but with the right allies, it might just be possible. At first, we didn't think that was what he was going to do when we met him in the most recent chapters of Berserk, but the latest one has changed our opinion. We now think Daiba might be following his old ways, but for a new purpose. And that purpose is to save the world. He's helping Guts unlock his final transformation. Why Daiba might be the one to save the world. The moment Daiba encountered Rickert and Salat in Falconia, he knew the tide was about to change because he could sense that there was something different about Rickert. That was pretty much confirmed by Salat when he mentioned Rickert having some kind of connection to the Falcon of Light, and this connection was explored in depth when Salat, Rickert, and Daiba returned to the Kushan Empire with their allies in tow. Previously, Daiba manipulated Ganishka to spread evil throughout the world as part of his demonic experiments. He wanted to see how far he could go when drawing upon the magic of the Abyss, and he discovered his limit in Vertanis. When Ganishka decided to keep pursuing power despite the risks, Daiba changed his tune on achieving power, and he became a staunch opponent of Griffith's new world just by the fact that he chose to lurk in the shadows instead of making his presence known. Griffith's new capital city had pardoned several Kushan soldiers who worked with Ganishka in the past. He could have easily gotten himself a pardon, especially if he pledged his magical services to Griffith's goal of blanketing the world in darkness. But clearly, Daiba didn't want to do that, which is why he stuck with Luca and her girls and horses when Rickert and Erica arrived in Falconia. When that happened, Daiba experienced true humanity and kindness for the first time in a long time thanks to his interactions with Erica, who's an earnest young girl. He doesn't admit it, but that plays a big role in him deciding to aid Rickert and Salat in their escape from Falconia. Turns out, Rickert is being pursued by one of Griffith's apostles for the crime of slapping him in front of the most important members of the royal court. This slap was also a rejection of an alliance with Griffith, so it makes sense that his most fanatical followers, like Locust the Moonlight Knight, would send an assassin after Rickert, who basically disrespected their god. Salat watches it all go down from a distance, so he's able to intervene on Rickert's behalf and save him from his would-be assassin Rakshas, whom Salat knows as an exile from his Bakiraka clan. After rescuing Rickert, Salat and two of his Tapasa head into Falconia with him, where they discuss how Rickert managed to do the impossible and what they can do to get away from the Falcon City. That's when Daiba eavesdrops on the crew and figures out their plan to sabotage Rakshas when he invariably attacks them at nightfall. Daiba gives Salat and Rickert top marks for preparing traps ahead of time when trying to deal with such a tricky opponent, but he knows that plans can't bridge the natural power gap between them. That's when he steps in to help because despite being on fire, which is his only weakness, Rakshas decides to douse himself with Erica's blood. After saving the girl who showed him kindness and tossing a bag of diamonds to Luca for her hospitality, Daiba summons a swarm of rats and snakes to hold down Rakshas while he and Salat and the rest escape on his Garudas. He's surprised by Rakshas breaking away from his bewitched animals rather quickly, but he's even more impressed with Rickert's clever contraption that blows the apostle right out of the sky. When Daiba and Salat bring Ricky back to the Kushan Empire, they question him, and Daiba realizes why Rickert was able to slap Griffith after all. In Chapter 76, we see Salat break down the reason for his restlessness in trying to attack the Falcon of Light. As Rickert explained to him, all those who serve Griffith as war demons are actually apostles, which means that Griffith is choosing to work alongside evil beings. Salat says that the Falcon has the power to change the world on a fundamental level and eradicate injustice from its very foundations, and yet he uses his godlike powers to expand his borders and engage in territorial disputes. He says that Griffith fears that which lies out of his reason being the word of evil, and that's why Salat and his allies will prevail. They know what their enemies really are, and they're able to distinguish themselves from their enemies quite clearly, but here's the thing. Salat isn't trained in the esoteric arts. He only knows the martial arts and the craft of ruling over a people. The deeply astral knowledge of the nature of Griffith's kingdom must have come to him from an astral source of information, and he has the best astral source of information in the world at his side in the form of Daiba. After hearing Rickert's full story, beginning with his days in the Band of the Falcon and his account of the eclipse, Daiba must have realized that it was because Rickert was able to move on from that incident and forge an identity of his own that he remains unaffected by Griffith's reappearance. Everyone has a deep unconscious desire for salvation buried in their hearts, and that's what motivates most of Griffith's human followers to, follow him. But Rickert has no such need because he doesn't see his life as one of injustice. He accepts things for what they are, and even when he's told the truth about the eclipse, Rickert acknowledges the fact that he can't bear a grudge as well as Guts can. It's Rickert's nature to forge ahead despite whatever pain he's going through, and that's the reason he will never succumb to the allure of evil. The fact that he was able to slap Griffith was Daiba's evidence that this kid might be the key to defeating the Falcon of Light, and maybe that's why he gets Rickert conscripted into the Kushan army. Both Daiba and Salat have witnessed his ingenious skill when it comes to crafting weapons, and they're aware of the fact that Rickert might be the one outfitting their soldiers for the final battle at the end of time. Rickert, in turn, takes his responsibility seriously because we see him reporting to and checking in with Daiba and Salat quite frequently. So the good guys have their plan to defeat the Master of Evil Set, and that wouldn't have been possible without Daiba's astral knowledge, but this fact becomes clearer when the Kushan Empire comes under attack. After recovering Guts from the oceans based on a prophecy, Daiba has Salat imprison him after stripping him of all his possessions, including the Behelit. Daiba must have figured out that Guts' life hangs between good and evil, and in his current state, he might just become prone to leaning towards the latter. He then updates the Kurultai Council about the true nature of Griffith, his war demons, and the many crimes Emperor Ganishka committed during his reign, when the Kurul Tai was sidelined, because that's how he was able to bring Daiba on without opposition in the first place. Under the conventional structure of the Empire, Ganishka would have had to go through many political hoops to get authorization for his demon army, but by eliminating them from the picture, he fast-tracked his conquest potentially by decades. He also would have wanted to keep his own involvement with dark magic a secret, knowing the political implications of the same, which is probably also why Daiba hides his role in the creation of the current state of the world as well. This makes Salat suspicious of him, because he knows by now that Daiba doesn't lie without reason. Just as he's about to ask the new Kushan Emperor to make him supreme commander of the Kushan army, Daiba points out that the Apostle Rakshas is emerging from the back of a Kushan clan leader, and Salat's request goes unheard. He gets caught up in trying to protect the Emperor's life, while Daiba scrambles to get his own magical beasts back under his control. Once he has them, he assists Salat in getting rid of the trolls that had suddenly appeared in the Kushan capital, while the prince himself chases after a wounded Rakshas. He finds Rakshas in Guts' cell and kills him, which enrages Salat because it breaks his image of Guts. He'd always looked up to the swordsman begrudgingly because he was the one who set the arrogant prince back on the path to redemption, but now seeing Guts submit to death so meekly, Salat couldn't hold back his own rage. Daiba wanted him to do so quite desperately, however, because as soon as he sees Salat yelling at Guts, he yells at the Tapasa to draw him back. Daiba had been on edge with the whole recovering the Black Swordsman mission because there was something he'd been keeping from Salat all that time. That secret seems to be the fact that if he pushes Guts too far, Salat might end up dying, which would affect all of Daiba's plans for the final battle. That would explain why Daiba protects Salat's life despite seemingly playing a political game against him, because in the very next chapter, Daiba betrays Salat. He blames Rakshas's appearance and the troll attack on Guts' brand of sacrifice, and maneuvers himself into a position where the new emperor heeds his advice before anyone else's. Daiba gets Guts exiled to the end of the world, which turns out to be a Kushan stupa used for interring bodies, but he strangely allows Salat to follow him to that place. You'd think that the Bakiraka prince would be angry with Daiba for taking their most powerful chess piece off the board before the coming war, but he's surprisingly patient with the wizard as he observes what happens to Guts within the stupa. In chapter 383, we see Daiba and Salat spend hours outside of Guts' new residence, ostensibly waiting for him to emerge, because Salat remarks that the quote-unquote thing is taking too long. Daiba tells him that in a place devoid of sight and sound and sensation, all a person can do is gaze within themselves and confront their own madness, which sounds surprisingly wise for a dude who's usually up to no good. It sounds like Daiba only pretended to blame Guts for everything so he could get him to the stupa because he needs Guts to undergo some sort of transformation. Daiba's fear of him is justified because it's possible that in his astral visions, Guts is always being portrayed as a feral and destructive beast. The prophecy that leads him to Guts in the first place identifies him as a chained black beast riding towards the Kushan Empire on a wooden horse, so we see that the bestial motif is tied closely to Guts' astral perception. This would also explain why Daiba was so on edge during his initial interactions with Guts, because he wasn't sure whether what he'd foreseen would actually end up happening. Just a couple of chapters before the Kushans encountered Guts, we saw his Beast of Darkness breaking free from its mental jail, and the Beast of Darkness is always portrayed as a great black beast. It could be that Daiba saw this beast in his scrying and deemed Guts to be quite dangerous. While it's possible that the brand of sacrifice attracted the trolls to the Kushan capital, it's highly unlikely that it opened a portal to the astral world, which we saw happening, or that it resurrected Rakshas, because the apostle specifically recalls having died to Rickard's bazooka the last time he was conscious. The brand doesn't have those powers, so it looks like what Daiba did here was commandeer an important political prisoner away from a person who might have used him incorrectly. The Kushan Empire, though aware of the magical threat, was still responding to it in quite a traditional manner. They were commandeering ships and their crews for their own armies and doing all sorts of wartime bureaucratic crap to justify treating Roderick and his men as essentially glorified prisoners. Daiba must have figured that under that process, he would have never gotten close enough to Guts to awaken whatever he needs to move past his heart's darkness, which is something Daiba has already seen before. Remember that he fought Guts in his berserker form for quite an extended period of time, and he accurately identified that he was clad in ode that made him extremely combative and borderline insane. He also witnessed the conversation between Ganishka and Guts, where he was surprised to learn that the latter had survived a sacrificial ritual. Daiba, with his immense knowledge of the astral world, especially its darkest depths, could have put two and two together and realized that Guts was hunting Griffith for vengeance, but that emotion was exactly what was keeping him stuck in this place where he couldn't reach Griffith physically, because revenge is ultimately an evil notion. There's no satisfaction or justice in revenge, and it only spurs a person into committing atrocities, like Guts has over the years. If he has any hope of defeating Griffith, then he first needs to untangle himself from the branches of evil, which can only happen when Guts has a truly honest conversation with himself about what he really wants. Throughout the series, we've seen how tough it is for him to clear up his internal dialogue because Guts is primarily a man of action. He prefers to swing first and ask questions later, so whenever he stops to think about what he actually wants, he ends up feeling conflicted. On one hand, he wants to protect Casca and his new friends to the best of his strength, but on the other hand, his life was ruined by Griffith, and he can't just let that slide for even a femtosecond. It's because Guts refuses to engage with his guilt and grief that he keeps looking for fights, and right now, Daiba has given him a stage where he will be forced to do nothing but self-reflect. He puts Guts within the Kushan Stupa, knowing how it functions, because he says that Guts needs to confront the madness within him before he can leave the structure. To that end, Guts has been swallowed up by a giant lotus leaf, which is now sinking into a pond in the middle of the stupa. Shortly before that happens, he's surrounded by blobs of blood that look like the ones that attacked St. Albion and Elfhelm, but are a little different because they don't have tortured faces and aren't trying to eat Guts' flesh. So what we think is happening here is that Guts is being paid a visit by the ancestral spirits of the Kushan mages and sages of the past, so that he can find a way to resolve his internal conflict and truly focus on defeating Griffith for the right reasons, to save the world for humanity's sake. We say this because stupas are, broadly speaking, the final resting places for the highest of Buddhist monks in our world, and there's no reason to believe that that isn't the case in Berserk as well. In fact, we see rows of dead Kushan Brahmins lining the path to the stupa, all of whom seem to have died mid-meditation. So, a stupa would be the place where you can commune with ancient wise spirits, and it makes sense that Daiba brought Guts here because this place has technically existed since the fall of Geiseric's empire. Remember that the Kushan Empire's understanding of magic and the arcane was adapted into their religious framework, and ritual internment is a big part of the final stages of a Buddhist monk's life. It's possible that these spirits within the stupa will cause a spiritual awakening in Guts, which will transform him meaningfully enough for Daiba and Salat to return to the Kushan capital with him, and for the Emperor to now accept him as an ally. So in the span of a few dozen chapters, Daiba has gone from being the evil sorcerer who benefits from evil and blood magic to the good wizard who's trying to help our hero awaken his hero's blood. This is why we call him the Master Manipulator of Berserk, because his actions basically put the second half of this series into motion. He got Ganishka started on his path to becoming an apostle, which he then exploited by pushing the boundaries on magical experimentation until he crashed and burned. Having learned his lesson, Daiba returns to his homeland determined not to repeat the mistakes of his past, so despite employing some of his old tricks like deceit and subterfuge, he now mostly works towards bringing goodness and light to the world. He's clearly focused on defeating the abominable apostles and stopping the absolute being that is the Falcon of Light from overwhelming the planet, because even a guy like Daiba considers consent a factor when trying to make the world magical, and it's been hinted many times that he's actually going to be the one who helps save the world. When the mages arrive on Kushan lands from Elfhelm, Daiba is mightily impressed by the fact that Shirke can already wander through the dragon path of the astral world, a highly difficult task for even a skilled mage like him. Daiba recognizes the magical potential of the Elfhelm mages, and more than that, he recognizes the gaps in their knowledge that he can plug or perhaps take advantage of. We know Daiba likes to play things close to the chest based on his abduction of Guts, so whatever he's got in store for the endgame isn't going to be nice and clean. It's gonna be messy and probably morally questionable, but it will be for the greater good because that's where Daiba seems to be swinging towards at the moment. It's true that there will always be a kernel of doubt at the back of our minds about Daiba's true motivations, because there was that moment where Guts thinks that Daiba is an apostle or somehow connected to them upon meeting him for the first time based on his life energy. But Daiba has come a long way since then, and he's seen the consequences of trying to bring magic back to the world en masse firsthand. He knows that Griffith is basically doing what he wanted his entire life, but his way of going about it will ultimately lead to the downfall of mankind, and that would ruin Daiba's dreams. Ultimately, he doesn't want to become king of the mages to lord over them. He wants to guide them towards unlocking new powers and unraveling the truth of the magical powers of the world, so that would be impossible if everyone ends up in the abyss as part of the vortex of souls. So Daiba is doubling down on guts, having a great therapy session with the Kushan ancestral spirits, because his calmness might be what the entire world now depends on. None of the current storyline of Berserk would have been possible if Daiba hadn't been a part of the story, and that's why he's the invisible hand guiding all of our main characters. Where that hand ends up dropping them at the end of the story is left ambiguous on purpose, but based on everything we've seen, the answer might be a bittersweet resolution. While Miura said that his tale would have a happy ending, unlike what most fans believe, we do think that there will be an element of sadness to it as well. And what could be sadder than the redeemed Paramarishi Senani giving his life to the war whilst helping our heroes defeat the evil God Hand with his knowledge of the dark arts one last time. Daiba's importance to Berserk cannot be stated enough, and that's why we've spent close to an hour explaining to you just why he's the master manipulator of Berserk. Marvelous verdict! Having said all that, it's time for us to end this video and ask you guys what you think of Daiba, because his character is one of the most interesting to us in this entire universe. Let us know your thoughts on whether he's the guiding hand of Berserk in the comments down below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Berserk content. We'll see you guys with another video real soon, so until next time, stay safe, and remember to keep on struggling, strugglers.